I have 30 minutes to give you a big journey from the past into the future. I'll try to do that. We have to learn from the past to predict the future. So we travel back first, and then we look ahead. But before we do that, I'd like to stop with today's headlines, or at least the headlines of the last year, so to say. It all started about a year ago, a little over a year ago, with Google's announcement of their neural machine translation, nearly indistinguishable from human translation quality, as if we know what human translation quality exactly represents, what it is. Only less than a month later, Systron follows and says, well, what you can do for free languages, we do for 30. And then Baidu joins in the turbulence with press announcements and say, they're buying translation at rock bottom prices, not for anyone who consumes those translations, but just to produce data. Mind you, this is something that maybe you haven't witnessed, but there is a search, a hunt for data. Then Amazon joins the other internet giants and says, we have a machine translation service as well. So it seems that all the internet giants are now in the game of machine translation because Facebook announces their convolutional model. Mind you, with the NeuroMT announcements, people were complaining that it takes so long to train a new engine. 2 weeks. Can you imagine? You have to wait 2 weeks before a new engine is trained on a new language pair. Some of you may remember years ago that it would take a year or 2 years to train a new language pair of Systron. The rule-based engines were now to 2 weeks. But no, not any longer. Facebook says we brought it back down to a few hours with this convolutional model. And that's what the MT trainers, developers really want. They want to test it all the time, real time. Is it improving? Of course, SDL joins the team and says we can do all of that, but in a very secure environment. And there is another investor in data in China. Again, the Chinese are fond of data. They know that that makes the difference if you have the right data. This is an investment in a tiny, small company by the second largest internet company in China, Sogu, who pays a lot of money for this language data company. And finally, good for us, there's a European winner in neural machine translation. They outperform Google. Well, I can assure you, that's only for short time. Last week we had the heads of Google, Amazon, and Microsoft in a conversation at the Taos annual conference. And McDuff, who's the head of machine translation at Google, as well as Chris Wendt from Microsoft, said, well, we see improvements every week, so this is just temporary. So the other thing that we concluded at the end of that conversation was that we're entering an altruistic, very collaborative world, because most of this is open source, is accessible to everyone. So machine translation is here for all of us to consume. And the battle is indeed in the data. Who has the right data? So the challenge here is getting the pace right. You all know the 5-year joke. In 1954, somebody read on the news after this first experiment with the IBM MT engine, in 5 years we'll translate all of the Soviet Union into the Queen's English. And every 5 years the expectation was postponed. So now, what is it, 60 years later or more than that, has the time arrived? Hopefully, we don't know, because you never know if you don't measure. That's one of our themes. You can't manage if you don't measure. A lot of all these news announcements are based on anecdotal and subjective judgments of quality. So let's dive into the past real quick. This is, I can't tell you the whole story. That would take a whole day or a couple of days. Some people ask me, write the book. No time. But you can find this in the Translation Technology Landscape Report on our website. It's a breakdown of the history of the translation industry in six simple decades. So we start with translation, localization, globalization. I'll dive into this story and this history at the age of globalization. In the age of globalization, we see that the translation memories are all connected and connecting to a client, to a server. The client wants to finally reap the benefits of all the investments in translation memory. It was originally a tool for the individual translator to enhance the productivity of the translator, but the clients want to get the benefits too. So connectivity rules in the globalization phase. Another thing that you see happening in this phase is that people are worrying about the management side of the translation process. We've done some consulting at the time, and we observed that there are so many human touch points in this process. Small job, big job, no difference. You have to count the words, you know, that's something that people did manually at the time still. And then you have to prepare the files, find your translation memory, contact the translators, the reviewers, all human touch points. And that's the other thing that people started to look into in the globalization phase. How can we automate that process? We called it the 42 steps, because that was the average. Sometimes it went up to 60 or more. Sometimes it was a little less. What else happened in the globalization phase? Well, there was another revival of machine translation. That's when TAUS was established. People came together and said, what if we join forces, we put all of these translation memories together. We make the journey further up from the client servers to the cloud, a cloud-based repository where we share all this translation data. And so we did, and since then, the cloud, the TAUS data cloud has helped many companies to improve their machine translation performance. We have something like 70 billion words in 2,300 language pairs in our database. We're entering the integration phase. This is where most companies are at the moment, most businesses probably. This is where they say, well, we've invested in technology, but how can we benefit from this in other departments and other functions of the enterprise? It's the first time that companies start to look strategically at translation. So that's a big win for us in the industry. Technology is basically an API. Now, you don't have to develop everything from scratch. You need APIs and web services to connect all the technologies. So the investments in the big GMS systems or TMS systems are now used in the customer support department, in the social media department, and for knowledge-based translation. So translation gets plugged in to many different departments, functions in the enterprises. Another thing that we see in this time and age is that already more words are translated by machines than by humans. And the big move to the cloud, of course. Here, very quick, I can't go over every detail of this slide, but we did SWOT analysis with enterprises to understand their weaknesses and their strength. And as you can see at the top here, very quickly, they're quite happy with their established process, with the translation memories that they've built up over the years, gives them a very high leverage. But when it comes to those opportunities, new markets, new media, new content, they feel that they're very sort of paralyzed almost. They can't do very much. They can't go up and down in quality when it's needed and if that's needed. They cannot so easily open new markets, enter new locales, new languages. They're pretty sort of fixed into their established processes. And that's all within an environment that probably explains to a high degree also this fixedness, so to say, a static supply chain. Many layers of subcontracting and functions that are replicated. People do quality management, do translation memory management, vendor management, but there's no clear definition of who's doing exactly what, so there is overlap. And that's why it's so hard to change things. And then we looked at the content that they're dealing with. At the top is the traditional static content, user documentation, and some marketing literature and what have you. At the bottom is the much bigger new content, dynamic content, e-commerce content, support content. And the interesting thing that we see happening is that the two now overlap. So what companies do, what you typically see happening is they leave the top, so to say, untouched. It's fine, you know, they're working with their traditional technology and vendors for all this new stuff, the new content, new media, new channels. They're trying out all the new technologies, the cloud-based technologies, machine translation. They're happy to use that as much as they can, but typically on the new parts in their business. So that's what we call the innovation dilemma. That's what you see currently happening. So let's take a quick journey here through what we call the 8 things to change. You know, so last century, they say, right? Your localization model. It's the old export model. It's typically like you have one definition of quality or one so-called definition, one expectation, you better say, of quality. It fits all purposes, all content, all audiences. You choose a locale where you want to sell your product, and you count your words because it's your content after all. You assign a translation memory to the content, to the project. It's a project that is defined and scoped out by you, and you send it down this cascaded supply chain, and it's unidirectional from English in most of the time into target languages. Well, in today's world, this century, everything is upside down. Really, practically, it's completely confusing because users request translation in many cases and you have no idea where they are. It could be an unexpected language and you have to respond to that. You have to respond to that with different levels of quality. So we have quality differentiation today. We have a long tail of languages. We have so much content, it's almost unbelievable. It's not just the content we own, but also the content we earn and that other people share with us as businesses. The translation memory is no longer the crucial part, but it's the data. The data is core. And it's a continuous translation workflow. It's agile now, as they say. And we try out new models of collaborative translation. And very often it's driven by the user, indeed. And therefore also multi-directional. So we're entering the convergence age. Translation shifts gears. This is in full speed at the moment. As I said already, more words translated by machines than by humans, by the human translation workforce, all of you and many more. How many? 150, 250,000 professional translators in the world. I'm sorry to say that you probably do only 1% of altogether of the total output of translation and diminishing every day. Because it's so easy. We're working for customers that can afford to pay for translation, but there is a very big world out there. People who are lost in translation. They click this button on their mobiles, and everything is datafied. It's embedded on every screen and every app, on every signboard in museums, in hospitals around the world. It's real time. Often it's good enough, but sometimes they need to go up in quality, personalized. It's continuous, and this world is clashing with the professional translation industry. And the CEO in many companies are asking, why don't you simply use machine translation? It's free, indeed. The internet giants, as we've seen, they're investing in machine translation. They own this market. There are only a few private players, suppliers of machine translation services, but it's minuscule, their revenue, and it's not growing very fast. So this is the time that innovators enter our market, from outside and from inside, but mostly from outside. Think about it. Google was, of course, the biggest disruptor in the translation industry. They never intended to do so. They were even embarrassed, ashamed of doing so, but they had to because it was increasing their revenue so much, because so many more people were looking at their ads now. So And that's happening all the time, with people converging, mixing machine translation into their product. Oh, sorry, the other way. So convergence is basically the combination of technologies. Speech and machine translation delivers spoken translation, and it's working remarkably well already. It's a combination of markets, the consumer and the business market, of business models, the freemium model with the paid models. You tell it, we have to figure out how to make it work in the business side of the world, in the translation industry. We're entering a world of drag and drop, plug and play, and translation is becoming a utility. It's everywhere, it's embedded in every device we're using. Machine translation is just an API. It's offered by the same internet giants. So that's why it's proliferating very quickly. And why do they do it? Because they get your data. It's the same everywhere, and as we've seen, the hunt is out for the data. The data makes the difference, not the technology. That's common to everyone these days. So we were overwhelmed at Taos, and we're a think tank, and we're expected to predict the future, but we didn't know. So we called for a meeting with the Taos community, some insiders. Come to Amsterdam in this hidden church here. We need to talk for 2.5 days. We did brainstorming about all these changes around us, and we said, what can we predict for the next 5 years? And we came out with a story of the translation industry in 10 mini chapters. And I'm going to run real quick through this, but again, a report is available on our website where you can read much more about this. So first of all, algorithmic management, data-driven, the robots. The robots are coming. And they replace our work, they enhance our work. Of course, we need to make a distinction now in data. By the way, all these mini chapters somehow overlap and are integrated, of course, so there's a bit of an artificial separation here because this is part of the datafication trend as well. We make a distinction between the language data, we call it language data, which is the translation memory data, which we already started collecting back in 2008. And now the metadata, so the data about translation, quality, productivity, location, technology, process, what have you, all these attributes that you can attach to every segment that gets produced in the sector. All of these data points help to automate the management process. Remember those 42 steps. We are not there yet, but some companies have self-driving translations. They do the resource allocation totally automatic. They can predict quality already from analyzing source stack based on data analysis. So algorithmic management is already here, and it's getting quickly very, very good. Datafication of translation, if you want to know more about this in terms of what it does to machine translation, Google the unreasonable effectiveness of data. It's quite old, already 2011. It's from the Google scientist who said, no, it doesn't matter how much data we add. Every time we add more data, even if it's noisy data with spelling errors and all kinds of bad translations in it, the quality keeps improving, measured by blue scores. So we need to find data, and in Europe we're working hard together on the Connecting European Facility project funded by the European Commission. I keep pointing to China, where there's not so much history with copyright and legacy of data. They may go a lot faster, and I think we'll see the world changing from English-centric to China-centric very quickly. And after all, the data will make the difference. Quality matters. Now this is important, and I think you like to hear this. I've said it for years. The ubiquitous availability of dumb translations will lead to an increase in demand for high-quality translation. I'm always thinking of this fantastic movie Il Postino, where Pablo Neruda explains to the postman, I mettaveri, it's about how you touch people's hearts. So we'll see a split. Yes, the machines will take over. They are much better at all this fast translation that is utility-based, utility-driven. But if we want to make a difference, we need the humans, we need you. So quality matters. Data help us to decide where to invest. The data will tell us which content requires this boutique-style approach, but there will be plenty of work in that field, at that part of the industry. So the convergence, I mentioned, that continues in a rapid pace. Translation becomes embedded in every vertical industry, embedded in the product. So it's no longer isolated as a standalone service, as we've known it for all of our lives, but it becomes invisible, converged into our deliverables. In San Jose last week, they said the future is about intelligent global content delivery. It's a new phrase that you'll see and hear a lot more about. Translation is disappearing as a standalone industry and service. Not that the profession disappears, as I just said, not that the sector disappears, but it kind of reinvents itself now. Speech translation is going a lot faster now with the improvements in technology, machine translation, speech technology. The NeuroMT is good for speech translation because it takes less memory, so it can easily be taken outside offices and used in small devices in wearable technology. You see tools already coming out, apps that do a remarkably good job on speech-to-speech translation. A split also in the agile translation, the bit-sized translation, and the long-read articles, which kind of overlaps with this boutique-style transcreation type of translation that I mentioned earlier. The quantum leap refers, of course, to the machine translation. We started interviewing all the developers of machine translation who were so excited about NeuroMT. And they said, where's all this excitement? Some people asked, where's all this excitement coming from? Where are the users? And we said, there are no users. It's the developers who haven't seen anything like this before. The results are so much better suddenly with the neural networks. And they say, what we've done in 20 years with statistical MT, we see now squeezed in 5 years, the same percentage improvement. And you've seen that happening already. I showed you these announcements from the past year in the back end for the researchers. There have been thousands of papers published about all the new inventions and breakthroughs in NeuroMT. So you can predict a future where everything is basically translated. Why not? Every piece of content. We may have filters on our apps, like you have ad blocks, you have translation blocks. Oh, I don't want to see this translation every time because it's ubiquitously available. It will always be there. It stimulates the demand for advertising money, right? Again, so this is illustrating the rapid improvement in NeuroMT. 5 years is 20 years of statistical. And then we get to the long tail of languages. So, of course, NeuroMT has a struggle still to serve many of the small languages, but the zero-shot translation, no time in the 30 minutes to explain all of that, even if I could. But it allows the developers to build engines for language pairs for which no parallel data exists. It allows developers to use face recognition, lip reading as input for the training of engines. So you'll see engines for many new language pairs coming out very quickly. Sorry. Pay as you go, of course, with all of that, the business models change in the industry. And we will be looking a lot more at the users. We've been in sort of an autopilot in the translation industry, like translating stuff that nobody was ever reading. Why? Now we're looking at it from a delivery point of view, the intelligent content delivery. How is it used? And the user may request the translation, as we've seen, and it will be real-time available. So, still, it's just hints, it's pointers to the future. We want to be more practical, so we started talking to the captains of industry Adolfo Hernandez from SDL, Ayman Kopti from Oracle, Rory Kaum from Lionbridge, Smith Ewell from WeLocalize. They were at our conference last week, and maybe you've seen the interviews that we published with them on our website. A couple of more clear sort of directions here. Adolfo says we're moving clearly from people-driven to data-driven. That's obvious. And Rory Cowan is stressing once again, how difficult it is to get the pace right, to get the time right. Is it really happening now? Ayman Kopti says we're making translation invisible. And Smith Ewell says we're now in the business of global talent search. So let's have a closer look here. The key takeaways from all of that is that change is here. Yes, bigger, more drastic than we've ever seen before in this industry. Absolutely. It's a revolution. It's not an evolution. Let that be clear. So jobs are changing completely. Processes are changing. The technology is changing. All we can do is take control of our careers, of our jobs, and we do that by measuring. We need dashboards. We'll be sitting behind dashboards more than ever before, checking our work, tracking our productivity, our quality, tracking the quality of the stuff that's coming out of the machines, benchmarking it, and analyzing these data. So we need to use data. The future is all about data. So let me try here for a moment with you to design the translation pipeline of the future. There's lots of content, obviously, and this content is channeled into a box that we call algorithmic management. The robots, essentially. No humans. The robots will do the resource allocation. Say, here's a job. Who shall we send it to? Which technology shall we use? What is the expected quality? All of that is calculated based on lots of data points that have been collected. So you get the confidence scores, you do the content profiling, and then based on the decisions made by these robots, we're going to make a distinction, and this is important. I think as an industry we need to agree on that. So this is very much a design here. We're starting to advocate this, promote this, and get the Taos community to embrace this, but we're proposing that we're distinguishing free flows of content when it comes to translation. First of all, there is the high-quality translation, and we propose to call it transcreation, as many people have already started doing. And then there is the stream of content that can do very well with a good enough approach. So we have two quality levels now. We have the high quality and we have good enough. And the good enough is going into review, not in post-editing, but we propose the title Review Reviewer. And then there is the stream of content that goes out with without any human touch, the fully automatic useful translation. This is this content that is 1,000 times bigger already today, or how much bigger we don't even know, than all the output of the human translation population in the world. It's already happening. And of course, this is all connected to another box that we call the quantum leap. So this is kind of a big box full of technology. Of course, the latest, the best neural machine translation. I would say neural, real-time, adaptive machine translation. Don't go for anything less. It's already there. Most suppliers are working very hard to make that available. So that's already there, and of course, every stream will tap into that technology, no matter which of the three flows of content you're working on. Then there is a box datafication. We need to collect all the data, both the language data, as I explained, and the metadata, so the data about translation, are crucial for continuous automation and improvement in this process. So there's the feedback loop for the training of the technology in the quantum leap, but also from the dashboards that we will be working with, there's a feedback of data for the machine learning, for the robots. for better resource allocation, for better matching, for better content profiling, and so on. So this is the modern translation pipeline that is becoming invisible. And people say we've made great progress in the past years, 5 years, on the level of interoperability through web services, APIs, and just because customers don't accept it any longer, that the content is and the tools are incompatible with the different technologies that you're using, and we're making great progress with definitions of quality, measurements of quality with the DOF-MQM methodology that is coming out now and being accepted. So this is a data-driven, invisible, self-learning, self-driving. It's an autonomous process. And now the big question, $60 million questions, they say, right? Where are the jobs? Well, we still need the engineers who fix the pipeline if there is a leak or something not working properly. And we need the reviewers. And we need the transcreators. And we need data analysts. Lots of data analysts. There's so much data. That's a new profession in our industry. And finally, there's this search for global talent. Smith, you will talked about. There's a plethora of new jobs. You can imagine, this is where we kind of go vertical inside industries. Now, yes, I'm almost there. Quality management becomes vital in everything we do. We see the jobs kind of blurring of translators, post-editors, reviewers becoming one single job. We have these free flows of content that we need to predict with using quality measurements. And the annotation and corrections are crucial to the training of the MT engines, of course. I'll skip this. You can read it on the slides later for time's sake. And I'll go also quick on this because it basically explains how DQF and the quality dashboard works. It's already integrated in many of the translation technologies that are out there available, and this is where the data points are collected, helping us to be prepared for the future. It's based on a methodology or an error typology that is funded by the European Commission, the MQM DQF error typology, where at least it's a vital part of that. So it's time for a counter-revolution. No reason to be worried. As I said, the jobs are changing. That is for sure, but most of you look very young to me, so you're really ready for that change. And think of the banking industry, right? In the old days, we had to count the money behind the counter. And it took a lot of people to make a transaction from one person to another, imagine from one country to another country. All of that is now become a utility, a feature in your mobile. And the same is happening to translation. It is featureized, it's a feature now. It's embedded, it's a utility. Did the banking industry go away? Not at all, on the contrary. It started to grow and add more value. I don't know if it's the most lucky comparison to the translation industry, but the translation industry, in my mind, has a fantastic future, but it's changing completely. So we have a mission as an industry. We need to help our companies grow across borders, for sure. Our institutions need to function better across the world, not just Europe. And we must eventualize cultural diversity. It goes much further than the text that we're working on. Thank you.